The party was in full swing in my sister Claire's perfectly manicured backyard. It was less a children's party and more a showcase for her husband's recent promotion. Men in expensive linen shirts stood in small clusters, talking about stock portfolios and golf swings, while their wives, in tasteful floral dresses, discussed preschool waiting lists and summer homes in the Hamptons. And then there was me, standing off to the side, feeling like a ghost at the feast. I'd lost my part-time job at a local library a month ago, and the thinness of my wallet felt like a physical ailment, a constant dull ache in my chest. Money was not just tight, it was a boa constrictor squeezing the air from my lungs with every passing day. My gift for my 5-year-old niece, Lily, was a beautiful hand-painted storybook. I'd spent weeks on it, painstakingly illustrating a whimsical tale about a brave little girl who befriends a grumpy dragon. I'd bound the pages myself, using a technique I'd learned in a college art class. When Lily tore off the wrapping paper, her eyes went wide. She clutched it to her chest, her face alight with genuine joy. "Auntie Ava, it's the best one," she squealed, completely oblivious to the material world her parents were so desperate to conquer. For a single beautiful moment, my heart swelled with pride. It was a pure, untainted connection, a moment of love that had nothing to do with price tags. The frosting on my niece's birthday cake looked like a perfect pink cloud, and for a second, I thought I could just float away on it. Then my own father's voice cut through the happy chatter. "Have you ever been made to feel so small by the people who are supposed to make you feel safe that you could just shrink into nothing?" That's when my father, Richard, put a hand on Claire's arm. His voice wasn't a whisper. It was a clear, resonant statement, pitched just loud enough for his circle of friends and me to hear perfectly. "Claire, make sure Ava doesn't get too close to the cake. We know she can't afford to replace it if she trips." But then my sister Claire drifted over. She picked up the book, her perfectly manicured fingers flipping through the pages with a practiced air of condescension. "Oh, Ava," she said, her voice dripping with a saccharine pity that was far more insulting than outright scorn. "How creative." She handed it back to me as if it were contaminated, then turned her attention to the mountain of expensive plastic-wrapped toys piling up on the lawn. The moment was gone, stomped out by her designer heel. The real blow, the one that would echo in my mind for years, came when it was time for the cake. It was a towering 4-tiered confection from the most exclusive bakery in the city, a monument to my brother-in-law's bonus. Pink roses made of spun sugar cascaded down its sides. It probably cost more than my rent. As Lily was led towards it, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated excitement, I stepped forward, wanting to see her expression up close, to share in that small, perfect joy. I scanned the crowd, my face burning with a heat that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. I saw Mr. Henderson, one of my father's oldest and most respected business partners, standing near the back of the group. He wasn't laughing. His expression was stoic, unreadable, but his eyes met mine for a brief, fleeting moment, and I saw a flicker of something. Maybe curiosity, maybe pity. It was impossible to tell. My mother, Eleanor, was on the other side of the patio. When she heard my father's words, she didn't look at me. She didn't defend me. She simply became intensely interested in the stack of paper napkins on the table, straightening them, patting them, refusing to meet my eyes. Her silence was a betrayal all its own, a quiet confirmation that in this family, my father's comfort was always more important than my dignity. The heat of shame was so intense it felt like I was going to be sick. It crawled up my throat, hot and acidic. I looked at Lily, who was now staring at me, her brow furrowed in confusion. She didn't understand the words, but she felt the shift in the atmosphere, the sudden tension. She saw the look on my face. That was the worst part, seeing her innocent confusion twisted by their casual cruelty. A few chuckles rippled through his business associates. It wasn't loud, riotous laughter, but something far worse. The quiet, knowing snicker of people who believed they were in on a private joke. My sister Claire didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. A small, cruel smirk played on her lips as she guided Lily's hands to the cake knife. My father's words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. He hadn't just called me poor, He had publicly branded me as a liability, a clumsy, worthless charity case, a risk. I didn't let myself break until I was safely inside my beat-up sedan. I closed the door, and the sound of the latch clicking shut was like a dam breaking. But the tears that streamed down my face weren't tears of sadness or self-pity. They were hot, furious tears of absolute rage. They were tears of fire. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, and stared at the reflection of my tear-streaked face in the rearview mirror. That night, sitting in that car, I made a promise to the broken woman staring back at me. They will never, ever have the power to make me feel that small again. The weeks that followed the party were a desolate, gray blur. My life became a miserable cycle of instant noodle dinners and the hollow silence of an inbox devoid of replies. The humiliation my father had served me on that sunny afternoon had cooled and hardened into a cold, dense knot of desperation in my stomach. It was a constant companion, a physical reminder of my failure. I was applying for everything, casting a wide, frantic net into the digital abyss. Receptionist, data entry clerk, retail associate, dog walker. If it had a submit button, I clicked it. But my resume, a patchwork quilt of library work and small freelance art projects, was getting no bites. To the algorithm, I was unemployable. To potential hiring managers, I was a ghost. I couldn't stay. I couldn't breathe their air for one more second. I forced a smile that felt like cracking plaster, walked over to Lily, and gave her a quick, tight hug. "Happy birthday, sweetie." "Auntie has to go," I whispered into her hair, which smelled like sunshine and sugar. Then, without a word to anyone else, I turned and walked away. The sound of their polite, resumed party chatter followed me down the long stone driveway, each murmur a tiny sharp stone hitting my skin. I hit my lowest point on a Tuesday. I came home from another fruitless trip to the post office to find a bright orange notice taped to my apartment door. The words "past due" were printed in a bold, accusatory font that seemed to scream at the entire hallway. My landlord, a man I'd only ever exchanged brief pleasantries with, had made my private shame a public spectacle. The piece of paper felt heavier than a tombstone. I ripped it off the door, my hands shaking, and crumpled it into a tight ball, my fingernails digging into my palms. I stumbled inside and slid down the door, the crumpled notice still clutched in my fist. The shame was so intense, so suffocating, I could barely draw a breath. It felt like the walls were closing in, the air thick with the stench of my own inadequacy. This was it, this was the bottom, the place my father always said I'd end up. My savings dwindled with terrifying speed. I watched the number in my bank account shrink, each dollar disappearing like a drop of water on a hot skillet. The shame of the party was now compounded by the very real fear of homelessness. I started eating one meal a day to save money, telling myself it was a new diet, a health kick. The hunger pangs were a dull throb, but the anxiety was a sharp stabbing pain that kept me awake at night. That evening, defeated and hollowed out, I was mindlessly scrolling through a local job board on my laptop. The screen glowed in the dark room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I was scrolling past listings for software engineers and marketing directors, jobs that felt like they were from another planet. And then, at the very bottom of the page, a tiny, unglamorous ad caught my eye. It was almost lost in the sea of corporate jargon. The text was simple, stark: part-time assistant needed for catering business. Must be organized, willing to work weekends, long hours, low pay. Long hours, low pay. It was a perfect summary of my current prospects. A service job. The kind of work my father would openly mock, a job for people who couldn't cut it in the real world. A job involving aprons and hairnets, and serving people like him. The thought was nauseating. But then another image surfaced from the depths of my memory. A happier one. I remembered being a little girl, spending summers with my grandmother. I remembered the quiet satisfaction of helping her plan the annual church bake sales. The meticulous lists, the color-coded labels on the tins, the precise scheduling of who would bake what and when. I remembered the scent of cinnamon and sugar, and the deep, uncomplicated joy of a well-organized event coming together perfectly. There was a system to it, a logic I understood. With nothing left to lose, I opened my resume file one more time. I deleted the flowery descriptions of my art projects and instead highlighted my organizational skills, my experience with scheduling at the library, my meticulous attention to detail. It felt like a desperate lie, but it was also somewhere deep down true. I attached the file to an email and sent it off into the void at 2 in the morning. It felt like stuffing a message in a bottle and tossing it into a vast and different ocean. I closed my laptop and fell into a fitful, dreamless sleep, expecting nothing. The next morning, my phone buzzed on the nightstand, jolting me awake. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, assuming it was a debt collector. But something made me answer. "Hello?" I croaked, my voice thick with sleep. Sleep. The voice on the other end was gruff, tired, and impatient. "Is this Ava Sterling?" "Marcus Vance, Vance Catering. I got your email," he said. No preamble, no pleasantries. My last assistant just quit mid-shift. Left a note saying, "I can't take the chaos. Can you be here in an hour?" "Yes," I said, sitting up. The question hung in the air, a lifeline thrown into the dark pit I'd fallen into. It wasn't a promise of a career, or wealth, or respect. It was just a chance. A chance to work. A chance to earn enough money to tear up the next orange notice before it was ever posted. "Yes," I said, my voice suddenly clear and steady. "I can be there in an hour." I walked into Vance Catering, and the scent of burnt coffee, garlic, and frantic energy hit me like a physical force. The place wasn't a charming rustic kitchen. It was a battle-scarred warehouse space, filled with stainless steel tables, towering racks of pots and pans, and a low-grade hum of organized chaos. A woman was furiously chopping onions in one corner, tears streaming down her face. A young man was on the phone, arguing in Spanish with what sounded like a delivery driver. "Prove you're useful," he said, his voice a low growl. The clipboard was a disaster. It was covered in a chaotic list of handwritten notes, phone numbers with no names, and supplier orders that were clearly overdue. Greasy fingerprints smudged the corners of the paper. It was the physical manifestation of the note his last assistant had left. This was the chaos. And in the center of it all was Marcus Vance. He was a man who looked exactly like his voice sounded, tired. He was probably in his late 50s, with a dusting of flour on his faded black polo shirt, and deep-set, weary eyes that seemed to have seen every possible kitchen disaster. He didn't shake my hand. He didn't ask me about my previous experience or my 5-year plan. He just looked me up and down, grunted, and handed me a stained apron and a clipboard. He pointed to a small, cluttered desk crammed into a corner. "Those calls need to be made, now." Then he turned and strode back into the kitchen, shouting something about the temperature of a sauce. There was no interview. This was the interview. For a moment I just stood there, the clipboard in my hands, a wave of panic washing over me. This was a mistake. I was an artist, a librarian. I was in way over my head. But then the image of the orange notice on my door flashed in my mind, followed by the memory of my father's cruel smirk. That cold, hard knot of rage in my stomach tightened. No, I would not fail. I took a deep breath, walked to the desk, and started to work. I spent the first hour just deciphering the chicken scratch handwriting, creating a clean list on a fresh sheet of paper, separating tasks into categories, urgent calls, follow-ups, and inventory checks. Then I started making the calls. The first one was to a vegetable supplier who was angry about an unpaid invoice. I found the invoice buried under a stack of menus, confirmed the delivery, and promised that payment was being processed immediately. I was polite but firm, my library voice surprisingly effective at de-escalating his frustration. I called the supplier and didn't argue. I just listened. I let him vent about his packed schedule and unreliable clients. Then I calmly explained our situation, not as a demand, but as a problem we could maybe solve together. I mentioned that I'd noticed his company got a great write-up in a local food blog, a detail I'd quickly looked up before calling. His tone softened. By the end of the 10-minute call, he had agreed to make our delivery the first stop of his day. I spent the next 8 hours untangling the mess that was his administrative system. I found a box of colored sticky notes and created a simple color-coded system for incoming orders: red for high priority, yellow for pending, green for confirmed. I organized the jumble of invoices into a clean, chronological file. The biggest challenge was a call to a specialty meat supplier who was refusing to move up a delivery time for a big event we had that weekend. Marcus had clearly already tried and failed, judging by the furious "no" scribbled next to the number. At 7 o'clock, long after the onion chopper and the Spanish-speaking kid had gone home, Marcus walked out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. He looked exhausted. He stalked over to the desk, ready to inspect my work, a skeptical look on his face. He picked up the clipboard, now neat and orderly with my new system. He looked at the clean list of completed calls with notes on every conversation. He saw the note confirming the new delivery time from the difficult meat supplier. He was silent for a long time, just looking at the clipboard. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time all day. His expression, which had been a permanent mask of frustration, softened almost imperceptibly at the edges. I asked him about his new smokehouse, I said simply, and I listened. "How did you get Frank's Meats to change their delivery time?" he asked, his voice low, stripped of its earlier gruffness. He nodded slowly, a flicker of something that looked like respect in his tired eyes. He leaned against the steel counter and let out a long sigh. "I used to have a place," he said, his gaze distant. "A real restaurant, downtown. White tablecloths, a wine list as thick as a book." He told me he'd built it from the ground up with a partner, a charismatic friend who handled the books. The friend turned out to be a crook, cooking the books for years, siphoning off the profits and running up massive debts in the company's name. One day the partner vanished, leaving Marcus with nothing but a mountain of debt, a tarnished reputation, and a deep-seated mistrust of people. This catering business was all he had managed to salvage from the wreckage. "I see something in you," he said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. "You don't just work, you see the whole system. You don't just plug holes, you fix what's broken." He pushed himself off the counter and stood in front of me. "I'll make you a deal. The pay is still terrible for now. The hours are still long. But I'll teach you everything I know about this business. Not just how to chop an onion, but how to cost a menu, how to manage a difficult client, how to smell a bad deal from a mile away. In return, you help me drag this company back from the brink." He paused, his gaze intense. "It's not a favor, it's an investment." For the first time in years, maybe my entire life, someone was looking at me and seeing potential, not my perceived failures. He wasn't my father, seeing a disappointment. He wasn't my sister, seeing a charity case. He was a stranger, a burnt-out, cynical man who looked at me and saw an investment. A single tear, not of rage or shame, but of overwhelming gratitude, escaped and trickled down my cheek. I quickly wiped it away. He taught me the gritty, unglamorous reality of the food business. We spent hours poring over spreadsheets, him showing me how a 2-cent increase in the price of flour could decimate the profit margin on a dinner for 200. I learned about food safety regulations, the precise temperatures at which bacteria breed, and the legal labyrinth of liability insurance. He taught me the art of creating a wow factor on a shoestring budget, how a strategically placed sprig of rosemary or a drizzle of balsamic glaze could elevate a simple dish into something that looked and felt luxurious. He would grill me on the spot. "A client wants a 5-course meal for 100 people, but only has the budget for a buffet. What do you do, Ava? Go." And I would have to think on my feet, suggesting a series of elegant, small-plate tasting stations that offered variety and perceived value without the cost of a formal plated dinner. "Okay," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "It's a deal." The next year was the hardest and most transformative of my life. My world shrank to 2 places, my tiny, sparse apartment and the bustling, perpetually fragrant kitchen of Vance Catering. Marcus was a man of his word. He was a demanding, relentless teacher. I was the first person to arrive in the morning, unlocking the doors in the pre-dawn darkness, and the last one to leave, often long after the moon had risen, my muscles aching and my brain buzzing with new information. I learned the names of every regular client, their likes, their dislikes, their allergies, the name of their dog. I knew that Mrs. Gable hated cilantro, and that Mr. Chen's wife was gluten-free. This wasn't just data to me, it was the core of our business. It was how we competed with the bigger, more impersonal companies. We offered a human touch. During this time, my family's calls became less frequent. I was always busy, always working. When they did call, I was vague. I have an office job, I'd say. It's in the events industry. They heard the word office and assumed it was some low-level administrative work, a secretarial position. It was so far beneath their notice that they quickly lost interest. Their lack of curiosity was a blessing. It gave me the space I needed to build my new life in secret. My days were a whirlwind of logistics, client calls, and putting out fires. My nights became my secret education. I didn't have money for formal classes, so the internet became my university. I stopped watching television and started watching tutorials on business management. I found free online courses in digital marketing and bookkeeping. I devoured articles on branding and social media strategy. The company's online presence was non-existent, so I decided to build one. I borrowed a friend's DSLR camera and spent a weekend taking beautiful, professional-looking photos of our most impressive dishes. I designed a new modern website for Vance Catering, with clean navigation and glowing testimonials from the clients I had worked so hard to please. I started an Instagram account, showcasing our food, our process, and the human element of our small team. Slowly, the phone started ringing more often, and the emails coming in were no longer just for small office lunches, but for weddings and corporate events. I almost didn't answer, but I knew ignoring her would only lead to a dozen more calls and accusatory texts. I stepped outside into the alley behind the kitchen, the smell of grease and garbage thick in the air. One afternoon, I was in the middle of a particularly stressful day. We had 3 events scheduled for the weekend, and a power outage had knocked out our walk-in freezer for 2 hours. I was on the phone with the power company, juggling inventory lists and trying to calm down a panicked Marcus, when my cell phone rang. It was Claire. "Ava, can you hear me?" Claire's voice was crystal clear, tinged with its usual note of impatient superiority. "I'm calling from the balcony. The view of the Eiffel Tower is just breathtaking." My heart pounded. This was a catastrophe. "Claire, I have to go," I said, cutting her off mid-sentence. What could possibly be more important then? She was in Paris, of course she was. She spent the next 10 minutes describing her 5-star hotel, the thread count of the sheets, the Michelin-starred restaurant where they had reservations, while she was gloating about a life of effortless luxury provided entirely by her husband. I saw one of our new hires, a young pastry chef named Maria, peek her head out the back door, her face pale with panic. She was holding a phone. "Ava," she whispered. "It's the bride for the Saturday wedding. She's in tears. Her venue just called and said they double-booked her reception hall." I hung up. I took the phone from Maria, my mind already racing. "Hi, Jessica," I said, my voice a mask of calm I did not feel. "This is Ava from Vance Catering. Don't worry, we are going to fix this. Give me 1 hour." I spent the next 55 minutes calling every venue I had ever worked with, every contact I had ever made. I called in favors. I leveraged our growing reputation. I found a beautiful, slightly smaller art gallery that had a last-minute cancellation. I negotiated a discount for the frantic bride and arranged for our team to do a site visit that very afternoon to replan the entire floor layout. I called the bride back and walked her through the new plan, assuring her it would be even more unique and beautiful than the original. By the time I hung up, she was crying again, but this time, they were tears of relief. I stood in that dirty alley, the distant sound of Paris Fashion Week from Claire's call replaced by the clatter of our kitchen getting back to work. The contrast was so stark, it was almost laughable. She lived in a world of luxury that had been handed to her. I was in the trenches, single-handedly building an entire world of my own. The work was grueling, exhausting, and often thankless. But with every problem I solved, Every glowing client review that came in, a new kind of confidence was taking root inside me. It was a deep, quiet strength, forged in pressure and hard work. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was building. Our reputation was growing like a slow-rising dough, steadily and surely. We were no longer just a backup option for small office parties, we were starting to land bigger, more profitable events. Word of mouth was our best marketing tool. Clients would rave about our attention to detail, our reliability, and most importantly, our food. Each successful wedding or corporate gala felt like a personal victory, a small brick laid in the foundation of my new life. He told us he was impressed. He'd been hearing our name, Vance Catering, pop up more and more. He'd even tasted our food at a recent fundraiser. "You've got a good brand," he said, looking around our modest office with a dismissive air. A little rustic but solid. One Tuesday afternoon, a man in a razor-sharp suit walked into our office. He was the kind of man my father would admire. Expensive watch, confident stride, and the predatory smile of someone who always gets what he wants. He introduced himself as Arthur Croft, the owner of a major corporate event planning firm. They were one of our biggest competitors, a behemoth known for their slick marketing and for cutting corners wherever they could. Marcus picked up the paper, his hand trembling slightly. I saw the deep, profound weariness in his eyes, the accumulated exhaustion of decades of struggle. I could see him picturing it, the sun, the sand, the freedom from all this stress. For a moment, I knew he was tempted. Then he got to the point. He wanted to buy us out. He slid a folder across the table. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a number on it. The number was staggering. It had so many zeros I had to count them twice. It was enough money for Marcus to retire comfortably to a beach in Costa Rica and never worry about an unpaid invoice again. It was enough for me to buy a house, a real house, in cash. But then Croft laid out his plan. "Of course, we'll make a few changes to maximize efficiency," he said smoothly. "My people will take over the books, we'll streamline the menu, switch to some more cost-effective suppliers." I knew what that meant. Frozen ingredients, pre-made sauces, and we'll have to let most of your current staff go. My firm has our own trained service teams. Croft looked at Marcus, but Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he looked at me. His face was unreadable, but his eyes asked a clear question. What do we do? He was leaving the decision, the future of everything we had built, in my hands. I thought about my team. I thought about the local farmers we supported, people whose names I knew. I thought about the pride we all took in serving food that was honest and good. I thought about my promise to myself, that I would build something real, something of value. This deal was the opposite of that. It was a shortcut. It was a lie. He was going to gut the company. He would fire Maria, and Juan, and everyone else who had worked so hard to build this with us. He would trade our local farmers for massive, impersonal food distributors. He would keep the Vance name, the name we had polished with integrity and hard work, and use it to sell a cheap, subpar product. It was a quick and easy payday, a deal built on deception. He blinked, clearly stunned. He wasn't used to being told no. A humorless smirk twisted his lips. "Integrity doesn't pay the bills," he scoffed. He stood up, adjusted his tie, and walked out without another word. The moment the door closed, Marcus let out a long, slow breath, a sound of immense relief. He walked over and clapped me firmly on the shoulder. His eyes were shining. "My last partner," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "would have taken that deal in a heartbeat. He would have sold his own mother for a fraction of that price." He squeezed my shoulder. I knew I made the right investment. I slid the folder back across the table. I looked Arthur Croft directly in the eye, my voice even and calm. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Croft," I said, "but our name isn't for sale. Our integrity is worth more." It was inevitable, I suppose. The world is smaller than you think, especially when your sister makes it her business to know everyone else's. Claire found out where I was working through a mutual acquaintance, a woman from her tennis club who had attended a charity auction we catered. The phone call came on a Wednesday morning. I was in the middle of finalizing a menu for a fall wedding. debating the merits of butternut squash soup versus pumpkin bisque. That moment was a turning point. It wasn't just his company or my job anymore. It was ours. That decision, that refusal to sell out, cemented our partnership. It defined our mission. We weren't just in the business of selling food. We were in the business of keeping promises. Well, Ava. Her voice slithered through the phone, dripping with a mixture of shock and glee. I heard the most amusing thing. My friend Jessica told me you served her a canapé last weekend. She paused for effect. A caterer, Ava. Seriously. After all of Dad's lectures about making something of yourself. I hope you're at least wearing a hairnet. I didn't rise to the bait. It's a good job, Claire. I'm happy, I said. My voice flat and devoid of the emotion she was hoping to provoke. Her disappointment was audible in the silence that followed. I have to go. I have a client waiting, I said, and hung up before she could fire another volley. The night before the event, it started. A flood of one-star reviews suddenly appeared on our Yelp page, Google profile, and every local food blog that would allow them. They were all posted within the same hour. They were clearly fake, but they were clever. They used specific, fabricated details. The chicken was raw in the middle. The head server was incredibly rude and smelled of smoke. I'm sure I got food poisoning from their questionable shrimp. The details were designed to sow maximum doubt and fear. A week later, the attack came. It was more vicious and calculated than I could have imagined. We were on the cusp of our biggest event yet, a high-profile charity auction for the city's children's hospital. It was being held at the museum, and the guest list was a who's who of local philanthropists and business leaders. Landing this contract had been a huge coup for us. Our success that night could elevate our company to a whole new level. Then, on the morning of the event, just as our team was loading the first of the refrigerated trucks, a sleek city vehicle pulled up to our warehouse. A man in a crisp uniform with a clipboard stepped out. He was a health inspector. He said he was there to conduct a surprise inspection, citing a detailed anonymous tip that had been called in an hour earlier. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine as I read them. This was not a coincidence. This was a coordinated assault. Panic erupted in the kitchen. My team, normally a well-oiled machine, started to look rattled. Marcus's face was a thundercloud of fury. He started pacing, muttering about lawyers and harassment. But as the chaos swirled around me, I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. This was just like the double-booked wedding venue. It was just another problem to solve. This was what I was good at. I greeted the inspector politely and led him to my office. I didn't get defensive. I didn't make excuses. I simply pulled out our records, our meticulously kept, color-coded, cross-referenced records. I showed him our daily temperature logs for every refrigerator and freezer, signed and dated. I showed him the invoices from our suppliers, tracing every ingredient back to its source, reputable, certified local farms and businesses. I showed him the hygiene certifications for every single member of our staff. Marcus, I said, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the rising panic. Let me handle this. I walked him through our entire facility, explaining our food handling processes with quiet, professional confidence. I showed him our dishwashing station, our separate cutting boards for meat and produce, our hand-washing protocols. He started out skeptical and stern, but as the minutes ticked by, I could see his expression change. He was impressed. He was a man who appreciated systems and order, and our entire operation was a testament to both. The moment he drove away, the calm evaporated, and adrenaline took over. All right, everyone. Listen up, I called out, my voice ringing with an authority I didn't know I possessed. We are 3 hours behind. We can feel sorry for ourselves, or we can make this the most flawless event this city has ever seen. Let's get to work. The energy in the kitchen shifted. My team rallied, their fear replaced by a fierce, determined pride. We worked at a frantic, almost inhuman pace. Every movement was precise, economical. We were a symphony of chopping, searing, and plating. We loaded the trucks in record time and sped across town to the museum, pulling up just as the first guests were scheduled to arrive. We pulled it off, but just barely. The whole night I ran on pure adrenaline, a tight smile plastered on my face. After a thorough, painstaking inspection, he found nothing, not a single violation. Your operation is one of the cleanest I've seen, he admitted, signing off on his report. But the inspection had cost us 3 precious, irreplaceable hours. That night, after the event was a resounding success, she sought me out personally. She took my hands in hers and looked me in the eye. "Young lady," she said, her voice warm but firm, "I've been running these events for 20 years. I have never seen a caterer handle a crisis with that much grace and competence. You have my business and my recommendation for life." The sabotage attempt, so maliciously designed to ruin us, backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. The host of the charity auction was a woman named Eleanor Vance, no relation to Marcus, a coincidence that made us both smile, a formidable figure in the city's philanthropic circles. She had been at the museum that morning for a final walkthrough and had witnessed the entire drama with the health inspector. She saw my calm demeanor, our team's professionalism under extreme pressure, and our frantic last-minute race to set up. As I watched the wealthy guests mingle, sipping champagne and nibbling on the appetizers my team had so heroically prepared, I knew with a certainty that was as solid as the floor beneath my feet that my father and Claire were behind the attack. This had their fingerprints all over it, the cruelty, the cowardice, the attempt to humiliate and destroy. But as I looked around at my exhausted but triumphant team, I didn't feel broken. Their poison hadn't worked. It had only made me stronger. It had only made me stronger. Their cruelty didn't break me. It fueled me. She was true to her word. In the weeks that followed, referrals poured in. It seemed that every influential person in the city had heard the story of the sabotaged caterer who still managed to pull off a flawless event. Our reputation for resilience and professionalism became our new calling card. We were no longer just the caterer with good food. We were the caterer who could be trusted, no matter what. One evening, after a particularly long day of back-to-back client meetings and menu tastings, Marcus asked me to stay behind. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey, a rare indulgence, and we sat in my small, now organized office. The business exploded. We were so busy we had to turn clients away. We quickly outgrew our warehouse space and leased a much larger, state-of-the-art kitchen in a new commercial development. We hired more staff, more chefs, more servers, a dedicated logistics manager. I hired Maria, the young pastry chef, who had panicked during the wedding crisis, to be my head of pastry. She had blossomed into a confident and creative leader. "Ava," he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "I'm tired." He looked it. The deep lines on his face seemed to have multiplied in the past year, but the weariness in his eyes was different now. It was softer, less haunted. All of this," he said, gesturing around the bustling kitchen visible through my office window. "This is your energy. It's your system. You're the heart of it. The business has a momentum I can't keep up with anymore." I was speechless. I just stared at him, my mind trying to process his words. My own heart sank. I thought he was going to say he was closing up shop, that it was all too much. But then he smiled. A genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. "I'm not selling to some corporate shark, Ava. I'm not leaving you high and dry." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "I'm selling it to you." We made a strategic decision together. For the sake of continuity with our long-standing clients and suppliers, we would keep the ownership change quiet for a while. To the outside world, Marcus was still the face of the company, the grizzled owner who was slowly transitioning into a consulting role for his retirement. I was still his hard-working second-in-command. It was the perfect cover. We had a lawyer draw up the papers. A week later, we sat in a sterile conference room and signed the documents that officially transferred ownership of the company to me. Just like that, it was mine. My company. He laid out a proposal for a formal, structured buyout. I would become the official, sole owner of Vance Premier Catering. We had added the Premier after the charity auction. I wouldn't need a bank loan. We would use the company's own future profits to pay him in installments over the next 5 years. It was a life-changing opportunity, a culmination of every 16-hour day, every sleepless night, every ounce of sweat and passion I had poured into this place. It was a gesture of immense trust and faith. On paper, in a quiet file in a lawyer's office, I was one of the most successful new business owners in the city. I was in charge of a thriving enterprise with dozens of employees and a multi-million-dollar revenue stream. But in my family's eyes, I was still just Ava, the broke sister who worked in a kitchen, the family failure they whispered about at holiday dinners. The secret felt like a suit of armor, protecting me as I grew stronger within it. I didn't need their approval anymore. I was too busy building an empire they couldn't even see. Then, one Tuesday, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived in my mail. The paper was heavy, expensive. My name and address were written in elegant calligraphy. It was an invitation to my father's 60th birthday gala. It was being held at the Grand Monarch Hotel, the most exclusive and expensive venue in the entire state, a place where rooms started at $2,000 a night. Months turned into a year, then another. The business wasn't just thriving, it was soaring beyond my wildest dreams. We became the go-to caterer for the city's most exclusive events. We had a waiting list. I paid off Marcus's buyout plan in just under 3 years, well ahead of schedule. He was now happily and officially retired, sending me postcards of him fishing in the Florida Keys. The first thing I did with my own profits was buy a house. Not a mansion like my sister's, but a beautiful light-filled condo in a restored historic building downtown, with a large kitchen and a small balcony where I grew herbs. I was confident, secure, and for the first time in my adult life, deeply and truly happy. My first visceral instinct was to throw it in the trash. Why would I willingly walk back into the lion's den? Why would I subject myself to their pitying glances and backhanded compliments all over again? I had built a life so far removed from their judgment. I didn't need to be a part of their world. I dropped the invitation on my kitchen counter and walked away, but it sat there, mocking me. That evening, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I picked up the phone and called Marcus. He answered on the third ring, the sound of seagulls in the background. The invitation itself felt like a power play, a heavy, embossed declaration of their success. I knew exactly what this was. It wasn't a genuine desire for my presence. It was a stage, meticulously set for my family to perform their wealth and status, and to once again frame me as the family footnote, the cautionary tale. I could already hear the introductions. And this is my other daughter, Ava. She's doing her own thing. Worse, I said. I've been invited to my father's 60th birthday party. I told him all about it. The lavish venue, the inevitable humiliation, my instinct to decline. He listened patiently, without interrupting, until I had vented all my frustration and anxiety. Don't tell me the oven's on fire, he chuckled. The next day, I picked up the heavy invitation. I filled out the RSVP card with a steady hand, checking the box for yes, and in the space for a +1, I wrote, Mr. Marcus Vance. I booked him a first-class plane ticket from Florida that very afternoon. It was time for the curtain to rise. When I was done, there was a long pause on his end. Then he said, his voice quiet but firm, Kid, they're not inviting the girl who ran out of that birthday party 2 years ago. They have no idea who they're inviting. They're inviting a ghost, a memory of someone who doesn't exist anymore. He took a breath. Go and let them meet the woman you've become. You don't have to prove anything to them. You just have to be you. You're not going for them. You're going for yourself. His words cut through my anxiety, steadying me. He was right. Hiding away would be a victory for them. It would confirm their narrative that I couldn't handle their world. But I wasn't that scared, fragile girl anymore. I owned my world now. The Grand Monarch Hotel was even more opulent than I had imagined. A crystal chandelier the size of a small car hung in the lobby, dripping light onto the polished marble floors. I walked in, and the scent of money and lilies filled the air. I was wearing a simple but elegant deep blue gown. It was a designer I admired, and I had bought it, not rented it. The fabric was heavy and cool against my skin. I didn't feel like an imposter. For the first time, I felt like I belonged in a place like this. not because of a man's name or a family connection, but because I had earned my place. I felt calm, centered, and ready. My family was holding court near the entrance to the grand ballroom. The sight of me walking towards them literally stopped them in their tracks. My father, Richard, was in mid-laugh with a group of men, and the sound died in his throat. My sister Claire, who was standing beside him, turned, and her eyes widened in shock. My mother, Eleanor, just blinked, as if she were seeing an apparition. They looked me up and down, their expressions a swift, comical procession of shock, suspicion, and then a grudging sort of confusion. They didn't know what to make of me. I wasn't the frumpy, downtrodden girl from my niece's party. Claire circled me like a shark, her eyes narrowed, dissecting my appearance. "That's a beautiful dress," she said, her voice a purr of insincere sweetness. "Must have cost a fortune on a cook's salary. Is it a rental?" "Well, well," my father said, recovering first, his voice booming with false heartiness. "Look what the cat dragged in. You clean up nice, Ava." He gestured to my dress. "Did your little boss give you the night off from washing dishes?" "It's not a rental, Claire," I said with a polite, placid smile, giving her nothing. Their next move was predictable. As we entered the ballroom, a hostess led me toward my table. They had seated me in the far back corner, a social Siberia next to some distant cousins and their sullen teenage children. It was a clear, deliberate slight, a public declaration of my status in the family hierarchy. From my seat, I could see Mr. Henderson, my father's old associate, at a prominent table near the front. He caught my eye as I sat down and gave me a brief, curious nod. I simply nodded back and took my seat without complaint. Throughout the cocktail hour, my father and sister made a point of dragging their important friends over to my table. Their introductions were masterpieces of passive aggression. "This is my other daughter, Ava," my father would say, a dismissive wave of his hand in my direction. "She's very independent." "Ava works in the food service industry," Claire would add, her tone implying that I was the one clearing the plates. "She's always been so artistic." After the main course plates were cleared, my father, Richard, made his way to the podium at the front of the grand ballroom. He tapped the microphone, a self-satisfied smile spreading across his face as the room fell silent. He held a glass of champagne in his hand, looking every bit the king in his castle. He launched into a long, rambling, self-congratulatory speech. He talked about his legacy, about building his empire from the ground up through sheer hard work and determination, a convenient revision of history that omitted the substantial inheritance he'd received from his own father. He gestured to my mother, who smiled wanly, and to a beaming Claire and her surgeon husband, praising them as the embodiment of his values of success and ambition. They thought they were controlling the narrative, carefully painting me into a corner for one final public put-down. They thought they were the directors of this grand play, setting the stage for their own triumph. They had absolutely no idea that they were standing on my stage, reading from my script, and the final act was about to begin. The room broke into polite applause. I felt Marcus, sitting beside me at our forgotten table in the back, tense slightly. I just took a slow, deliberate sip of my water, my heart beating a steady, calm rhythm. Then, he raised his glass to the room. "I also want to give a special thank you to the team that made this magnificent event possible," he boomed, his voice echoing through the sound system. "The food and service tonight have been second to none. Absolutely flawless. Let's have a round of applause for the best in the business, Vance Premier Catering." My father wasn't finished. He gestured towards the side of the stage, where a sharp-looking woman in a black blazer was standing with a clipboard, overseeing the service. "Sarah, the event manager, perhaps you'd like to say a word on behalf of your team. Come on up." Sarah, our head of operations and one of my first key hires, looked momentarily surprised but recovered instantly. She was a consummate professional. She walked to the podium with a confident smile. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. We at Vance Premier Catering are so honored to be a part of your celebration tonight," she said, her voice clear and professional, carrying to every corner of the vast room. "It's always a pleasure to execute an event in a magnificent venue like this." She smiled at my father, who was puffing out his chest with pride. Then she paused. Her gaze lifted from my father and began to scan the room. Deliberately, slowly. But the vision and the standard of excellence you've all experienced tonight. That credit belongs entirely to our leader. She's the one who personally designed this menu with your wife, Mr. Sterling. She's the one who inspires our team to strive for perfection. She drives every single thing we do. Another pause. The room was hanging on her every word. Her eyes continued their slow sweep of the crowd until they landed directly, unmistakably, on my table in the back corner. Her smile widened. So please, join me in thanking the true architect of this evening, the woman whose passion and integrity are the heart and soul of our company. Please thank the owner of Vance Premier Catering, Ms. Ava Sterling. And then, she gestured directly at me. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was a thick, heavy blanket that smothered all other sound. For a full 3 seconds, nothing happened. No one moved. No one breathed. Then a low wave of confused murmuring washed over the crowd, a ripple of whispers. Who? The daughter? What did she say? All eyes, hundreds of pairs of eyes, turned from the podium, from my father, and swiveled in unison toward the back of the room, toward me. I watched my father's face. It was a slow, agonizing masterpiece of emotional collapse. The triumphant crimson of his toast faded, draining away until his skin was a ghostly, sickly white. His proud, booming smile froze, a grotesque rictus of shock plastered on his lips. He looked like a statue of himself that had just been told it was a fraud. Beside him, Claire's jaw literally dropped. Her mouth fell open in a perfect, silent O of disbelief. A glass of champagne, which she had just raised for a toast, slipped from her slack fingers. It hit the polished dance floor and shattered, the sound unnaturally loud in the dead silence of the room. My mother, Eleanor, just stared, her hand fluttering to her throat in a gesture of pure, unadulterated shock. She looked from me, to my father, and back to me, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. I met the sea of staring faces. I didn't flinch. I simply calmly stood up from my chair and gave a small, gracious nod to Sarah at the podium. Then, something incredible happened. At his prominent table near the front, Mr. Henderson, the stoic observer from my niece's party, slowly got to his feet. He looked directly at me, and there was no confusion on his face. There was only a look of profound understanding and what I could only describe as deep, unwavering respect. He began to clap, his hands coming together in a slow, deliberate applause that broke the spell of silence. His applause was followed by another guest, a woman at a nearby table, then another man. Soon the entire ballroom was getting to its feet. The applause grew, swelling from a smattering of sound into a thunderous ovation. They weren't just applauding the caterer. They understood. In that single stunning moment, they were all piecing together the story in real time. The back corner table, the backhanded compliments, the public humiliation of a daughter, who it turned out was a powerhouse, hiding in plain sight. They were applauding the underdog, the quiet victory, the sheer delicious irony of it all. Next to me, Marcus was beaming, his eyes shining with a fierce paternal pride. He put a hand on my arm and squeezed it, his own applause joining the roar. The sound was deafening, but for my family, it must have been the sound of their world crumbling. Their perfectly constructed universe, built on a foundation of status and condescension, had just been publicly dismantled by the one person they never saw coming. Across the room, through the forest of applauding guests, I met my father's shocked, horrified gaze. His face was a canvas of raw, unfiltered humiliation, the same humiliation he had so casually inflicted on me 2 years ago. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just held his gaze, my expression calm and unreadable, letting him finally see the woman he had so badly, so completely, underestimated. He was, for the first time in his life, utterly and completely speechless. The next morning, I was in my office, my real office, the one with a large glass window that overlooked the sprawling city. The early sun cast long shadows across the buildings, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. My phone, sitting on the corner of my desk, had been buzzing non-stop since 7 a.m. It was a frantic, pulsating stream of tearful, incoherent voicemails from my mother and a string of panicked texts from Claire. There was also a single terse message from my father, sent at 3 in the morning. It said simply, "We need to talk." I ignored them all. I turned the phone over, silencing the buzzing, and took a sip of my coffee. The victory last night, the sweet, stunning moment of the reveal, didn't feel like a fiery explosion of revenge. I had expected it to, but it didn't. Instead, it felt like a quiet, steady warmth spreading through my chest. It was the feeling of a heavy weight being lifted, a weight I hadn't even realized I was still carrying. It was never about destroying them. I saw that now. It was about building myself to a place where their opinions were so small, so distant, they became irrelevant. The applause was nice, but the real prize was the silence I felt inside my own head this morning. My desk phone rang, and I answered. It was Marcus. "Morning, boss," he said, his voice brimming with laughter. "Just wanted to let you know that I saw your father and sister practically running out a side exit last night. Didn't even say goodbye to their guests. Their faces were like stone." He chuckled again. "I've never seen anything like it. You didn't just win, kid. You changed the whole game." "Thanks for being there, Marcus," I said, a genuine smile spreading across my face. It meant the world to me. We chatted for a few more minutes, and then I hung up and turned to the mountain of work waiting for me. We had a contract to finalize for the mayor's annual fundraising dinner. The real world, my world, went on. Later in the day, a delivery arrived. It was a massive bouquet of elegant white lilies and orchids. I assumed they were from Marcus, but the card was written in a strong, decisive script I didn't recognize. I opened the small envelope. The card was from Mr. Henderson. It read, "Congratulations on all your success. True character is its own reward." I placed the bouquet on the corner of my desk, and the scent filled the room. That card, that simple acknowledgement from a man who represented the world my father so desperately wanted to impress, meant more to me than the entire standing ovation. It was a validation not of my success, but of my character. I looked out the window again, at the city bustling with life below. The real prize wasn't their shock. It wasn't their humiliation. The real prize was the life I had built in secret. It was the loyalty of my team, the respect of my peers, the pride I felt looking at the thriving business I had created from nothing but grit and a refusal to be broken. My family is a group of people I used to know. My true family is the one I built, one invoice, one solved crisis, one loyal employee at a time. The revenge was just a side dish. My success is the main course. And for the first time in my life, I'm finally enjoying my meal in peace. My story is proof that the most powerful thing you can ever build is a life that makes you proud, on your own terms. Your worth is never determined by someone else's labels. What labels have you refused to accept? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your story. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of strength, resilience, and sweet, sweet success. Thanks for watching.